All right, and this one is not working, but it will be shortly. Welcome to session number 20 of Biblical Backgrounds. I'm Dr. John McMath. I'm joined here by my friends in Italy and in the Philippines, and we're studying the backgrounds of the Bible. All that context, all that trivial detail that helps us to understand the stuff that's really important. God's word is the only part we can be certain of. But all of these background bits help us to see the contrast. We can the stories of the Bible and the teaching of the Bible stands out against the background that it's set up against. It's like the green screen I have behind me with a picture. It's easy to pick my head out of the foreground because you see all this stuff in the background. The Bible also has a background, and we're working with that. Today we're going to go into the oh my, sometimes I'm too smart by half, and I forget what I'm doing. Okay, continue, join meeting, okay. No video. Whoops. All right, and it can't access the microphone. No audio. Okay. Here I am recording all of this crazy setup stuff. Anyway, we're going to begin with Jesus' youth, probably get into the Galilean ministry. So as we're thinking through the gospel backgrounds, when we look at the four gospels, we find the two of the gospels have a nativity scene, birth of Christ. Most of the gospels have a little bit when he's 12 years old and goes to the temple. And then we begin seeing Jesus in his public ministry when he's around 30 years old. 30 to 35 is about the range that scholars said. And from that point, we catch about 3.5 years. It's a period that overlaps 4 Passovers. So 3 to 3.5 years is about the range of Jesus' earthly ministry. And that begins in Galilee with the occasional trip to Jerusalem, but then ends with Jerusalem. The 3 synoptic gospels give us a lot of background in the Galilean ministry. The Gospel of John is primarily focused on Jesus' time in Jerusalem leading up to his crucifixion and resurrection. And so in today's lecture, I'm going to look at stuff that is primarily the background for Matthew and Luke, with a little bit of Mark thrown in for good measure. But mostly this is Matthew, Luke type stuff. And eventually we move far enough into it that we begin seeing Gospel of John popping up in the narrative. But the gospel message, the really important stuff about the birth, the life, the ministry, the death, and the resurrection of Christ is the most important message in the Bible. So it's amplified. It's not just stereo, but in 4 gospels, plus a 5th gospel that is really the Apostle Paul. And those differing messages all fit into a larger cultural and historical and linguistic and political background. So that's what we're going to look at today. Let's share the screen for this PowerPoint. Make sure this is working the way I want it to. Oops, there it is. Jesus Youth and the Galilean Ministry. And I'm going to move the gallery over here where I can see everybody. Good. Okay. The Bible is actually really quiet about the Jesus youth. We do have the birth narratives. We only have the one little snippet when he was 12 years old and went to the temple. But we do have a whole bunch of other background that helps us to set Jesus into his historical context. First, I want to talk about let's see where is my cursor? There it is. I want to talk a little bit about ancient literary accounts. Now, frankly, there's not a whole lot. We would not expect that ancient historians would have written very much about Jesus. It was not until the 3rd century that the church grew large enough to have a footprint within the Roman Empire. And the very early church was tiny, and the birth and life and death of one carpenter's son from Galilee is unlikely to have been very important to anybody. Jesus would not have appealed to the ancient historians who had a tendency to write about kings and emperors and great generals and massive land battles with horses and chariots. The life of one little family and a group of followers who proclaimed him the Messiah was a very minor deal. He was a carpenter. Later on, he's an itinerant preacher and a miracle worker who was crucified by the Romans. Except for the fact that the miracles were real, all of this was quite unremarkable to contemporaries outside of the newborn church. The early church recognized that Jesus really had done the miracles, and he had done the greatest of all possible miracles in the resurrection. But for those outside of the church, outside of the family of faith, this could all be written off with a simple, well, that's a lie. The early church, the church is just lying to us. That's what in the modern world would be called disinformation. We don't like that, or we don't agree with that, therefore it doesn't exist. We're going to ignore it. And the ancient world, for the most part, ignored the message of the early church. And for them, Jesus was just nobody. However, Jesus is mentioned by some very early sources. One of the most important is Josephus. Josephus is a Jewish historian. He's kind of a turncoat. He seems to have cooperated with the Romans a great deal, but he is probably our most important historical source for the time of Christ. He was alive from the time of Herod the Great until after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and he wrote about all of that. So Josephus is one of those books that is a little hard to work through. That takes a lot of introduction, a lot of study to jump into Josephus. He wrote in Greek, so we have to work with translations, and so Josephus is not user-friendly, let's put it that way, but he is there, and he's very, very important. And some scholars spend an entire career doing Josephus studies, simply because he's that important. There are 2 passages in Josephus that refer to Jesus. There's a longer passage and I'm not going to quote chapter and verse, it doesn't really matter, that is mostly authentic. That longer passage has a portion hailing Jesus as the Messiah promised by the Old Testament and come to save us from our sins. That sounds very, very unlike Josephus. There's one complete sentence there that modern scholars believe was probably added by a later Christian scribe. And that doesn't mean that it's not true. It just means that that's probably not Josephus. What Josephus had to say, the main historical details that Josephus gives us have to do with the birth during the time of Herod, his career as an itinerant preacher and miracle worker who was crucified by the Romans under Pontius Pilate. Essentially, Josephus lays out the broad historical narrative. So anyone who claims that Jesus really didn't exist, or he's just a code word for a kind of mushroom, really, there is a modern scholar who said that. The sacred mushroom and the cross, a really stupid piece of scholarship. But people who argue that Jesus never existed have to deal with Josephus, who was certainly not a believer and certainly not trying to say something nice. He was just writing history. So there's Jesus born during the life of Herod, grew up to be an itinerant preacher and miracle worker, and was crucified under Pontius Pilate, is exactly correct. So Jesus really lived. He really had the career that is spoken of in the Gospels, and he really died under Pontius Pilate. Josephus even includes the detail that the church seems to proclaim him to be a risen God, which is exactly true. And if you're a non-believer, a Jew who is not a believer, and you're trying to do accurate history, that you would want to include that. So Josephus is not a believer, but he is a good historian. The main historical details are supported by Josephus. And we know that this is authentic. There are brief mentions of the life of Christ also to be found in other ancient works. So there's a famous history by Suetonius called The Lives of the Caesars. And it includes like half a paragraph about an itinerant troublemaker who was executed by Pontius Pilate. Not much. Tacitus, one of the most important of the historians of the period, lived through this entire time. And his description of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD is one of our most important historical sources for the time. And Tacitus includes a note about a rebellion by one Christus. And that's all there is, but that's accurate. A character by the name of Thallus wrote a history of Greece, which includes a note about Jesus. There's an epistle by Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger is an interesting character on a whole lot of levels. When I teach church history, we always get into Pliny the Younger. The elder Pliny, the father of Pliny the Younger, actually died in the eruption of Vesuvius, 79 AD. But Pliny the Younger was a younger man. He went on to be a governor in Asia Minor under Trajan. He was a fairly important character. And he writes an epistle that includes a mention. Even the Babylonian Talmud, the Jewish Talmud, which was in the process of being compiled during the time of Christ, includes a note about a troublemaker, a rebel, one Yeshua, the son of Joseph, who rebelled against the Roman authorities and was crucified for his trouble. Okay, well, they obviously don't like Jesus, but they knew that he had lived, that he had died, that he was a troublemaker. He sure was. When he went through the temple, throwing out the money changers, he was altogether a troublemaker, and we can celebrate that. The world needs more troublemakers. Okay, Luke 2:2 speaks of a census. There was a census when Quirinius was the governor of Syria. And we know also from another passage that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod the Great. And we know that Herod the Great died in 4 BC. So the birth of Christ has to have happened before 4 BC, maybe 5 or 6 BC. Fact is, we don't know exactly. But we believe there was a census during the governorship of Quirinius. And a problem that has existed for many years with that particular note is that Josephus mentions Quirinius, who was the governor of Syria and who ran a census in 6 AD. Josephus actually calls it the 37th year of the Battle of Actium, but that's not important for us. We know that that would be 6 AD by our dating method. By the way, people sometimes ask questions about the dating of the birth of Christ. You know, if Jesus was, if we're dating the calendar, if we're setting up the calendar around the date of the birth of Christ, shouldn't he have been born in the year 0? Well, the simple answer is no. Actually, if that's the way it was, it would have been the year 1, but it didn't work that way because at the time there was nobody counting, and years were named for the events that happened in them, or the number of years since the beginning of the reign of some king or another. Up until about 1000 AD, under the Holy Roman Empire, a character by the name of Otto the Great or Otto the Third, or whichever Otto it was, decided that he wanted a calendar made based on the years since the birth of Christ. And he wanted his reign to happen during the 1000th year of the Christian era. And so that became the year 1000. And as it turns out, he wasn't quite accurate. So there are some scholars who argue that he was as much as 300 years off. It honestly doesn't matter. Today, our year is 2022, AD, Anno Domini, since Christ. And we actually know that Christ was probably born about 6 to even as early as 9 BC. We don't change those numbers every time we readjust the date for the birth of Christ, simply because it would mean changing every history book that's ever been written. It's just more convenient to stay with the stay with the definition of terms and leave it at that. Okay, so there's a Quirinius who made a census in 6 AD, and that's not so good because the censuses apparently happened every 14 years. That would make the other census, it's just wrong for anything that we're doing. What we have discovered just recently is coin evidence. This is a golden coin made during the time of Caesar Augustus with the name Quirinius on it. So this is a Quirinius who made this coin in a different era altogether. It doesn't tell us exactly which date, but while Augustus Caesar was in power. So there are two Quiriniuses, or Quirinii, or something like that. And we know now that the older Quirinius was a governor from about 11 BC to about 4 BC. And so the census could easily have happened in 8 BC and be the right time for what we're talking about in Luke 2:2. Luke's census has been illustrated recently by ancient papyri. We've got papyrus census forms, believe it or not. The government bureaucrats would come around from door to door and collect information from people. It was clear that the censuses were run every 14 years. We know that there was one in 6 AD, so 8 or 9 BC. Jesus' birth was shortly after that time. There was an interesting correlation with the wording of a papyrus in the British Museum, papyrus number 904, if you ever get to London and take a look at that, which mentions the requirement that all citizens of the Roman Empire return to their hometown. The hometown meaning the not necessarily the town where they were born, but where their family originated. So Mary and Joseph would have been required, because they were part of the lineage of David, they had to go back to the city of David, which is Bethlehem. Everything fits. So how about Bethlehem? What do we know about Bethlehem? Well, this is some shots from Bethlehem. The shot on the left is the bell tower in the Church of the Nativity. The pillars on the right are looking down an aisle in the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. And this shot in the middle is down in what we call the Birth Grotto. It's a cave underneath the Church of the Nativity. Now, what do we know about all of this? Well, one thing we know is that none of us will ever be able to get a picture like the one on the left again. About 20 years ago, the Arabs living in Bethlehem decided to use the Church of the Nativity Tower as a location for taking pot shots with rifles at the Jewish settlers who lived there. And several people got killed. The Israeli army considered tearing down the bell tower, but thought better of it. And so they simply walled it off to make it impossible for anybody else to ever get up there. So I got up in that tower in 1985, which is just before some of these things happened. And I've never been able to go up again. And this is not a very good picture, but it's all I've got. The Birth Grotto is celebrated as the very spot. You see the golden starburst on the floor, and those are wine stains in the marble, because they leave out wine for reasons I don't understand. It's run by the Greek Orthodox, and I'm not sure what their reasoning is. The smell of incense and stale wine, sweaty people. It's not my favorite place to visit, but that is very likely the right place. The Emperor Hadrian, back in 117 AD, actually recognized that this was a place where the gods were present. He planted a grove of trees to the god Adonis in this place. Church fathers from the first and second centuries make a note that the location of the birth of Christ was known. They speak about a cave which is associated with a house in Bethlehem. When the Bible says there was no room in the inn, everybody thinks we're looking for a hotel in Bethlehem that turned the Holy Family away, and of course that's not true. There were no hotels in those days. The inn in question is the regular living quarters of the house. All of the families had to come back to Bethlehem. So it was a very crowded place, and the family home probably had everybody living there, and they were sleeping in odd quarters and the couch in the back bedroom and all kinds of places, wherever they could around the house. And Mary was pregnant and getting ready to give birth. Joseph and Mary went to the stable part of the house, which would have been in December or whatever part of the year it was. It would have been the cold part of the year. They would have gone to a place relatively warm and relatively private. And all the ladies of the family would have come and helped out, but there also would have been the sheep and the goats and maybe a camel or two and a donkey. It all would have happened right there. The shepherds from nearby, who kept watch over the flocks of sheep and goats that were sacrificial animals for the temple, would have been able to come into town and find the little house where this miracle was happening. So there were a lot of people very early on who actually knew whose house it was and where the cave was behind the house. It all would have been associated. So there's no reason to think that the early church wouldn't have known. By the time that churches could be built, the Emperor Constantine in the 300s actually sent his mother, a lady by the name of Helena. The Catholics call her Saint Helena, but she just seems to be a nice enough lady. But she didn't do any research. She simply followed the traditional locations. Eusebius, who was a bishop of Caesarea and a friend of Constantine, says that Helena went to Bethlehem and inquired of Christians there, who pointed her to the location, and everybody believed it was the right place. After this time, there are other testimonies. Jerome, one of the most famous scholars of the early church, translator of the Vulgate, spent like 35 years living in an extension of this cave in Bethlehem under the Church of the Nativity. We can still visit that today. And he's an expert geographer. Jerome calls the land the fifth gospel. And so his descriptions of the places for the gospel narrative are really important. He's a first-hand primary source for the locations of things, and hardly ever do we disagree with Jerome because he was right there, and he was listening not only to the traditions but looking at the facts on the ground. And he says there's no question this is the right place. Later on, much later on, the Franciscans, a Catholic order, sent archaeologists to expose a mosaic floor about 2 feet below the surface of this present marble. This probably dates from the 5th century AD, when the building was remodeled and reconstructed. The bases of the pillars of this grotto are even lower than that. So it's very, very likely that what you're looking at there is really the place. There's no good argument for it to be any place else. Okay, and people usually don't worry too much about Bethlehem. We worry about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, but we'll get there. Nazareth is a little harder to really visualize. The Roman Catholics have built a church about 50 years ago. Oh no, 1955. That church was built, and that's called the Church of the Annunciation. And we're told that Jesus, after his birth and after a brief time in Egypt, moved back to Nazareth with his parents, and there Jesus grew up. Nazareth during the time of Christ was a relatively unimportant provincial village, to say the least. It was an unwalled village, about 400 meters above sea level in the southern Galilee hill country, in the territory of Zebulun. There were excavations in Nazareth by an Italian Jesuit named Bugatti. That's when the present church was built. And that gives us a little information about the nature of the village in Jesus' time. Not a whole lot. In Nazareth, we don't expect to find grand monumental architecture with Herodian ashlar blocks or anything like that. There's nothing there. There's really nothing there. We know that Nazareth was an agricultural settlement. It was not exactly subsistence farming. They were beyond that. There were numerous wine presses and olive presses and caves for the storage of grain, and very large cisterns for the storage of water and wine. So there was undoubtedly trading going on. There were merchants in Nazareth who sold this in other places. Jesus' growing up years happened here in this little village. Now, he and Joseph had their commercial outlet. They had a kind of a storefront in a market town not too far away, within walking distance, several miles distance, called Sepphoris. And I'll show you pictures of Sepphoris later, I think. We may get there today. Okay. I'm a little later on, but I've gotten out of order here. That's strange. The baptismal site for Jesus, which takes place just as his ministry is getting started, is said to have happened at Bethany beyond the Jordan. That's John 1:28. And the location of Bethany beyond Jordan is disputed. Like so many things, we really don't know. To me, it seems reasonable that John the Baptist had some connections with the community at Qumran, which is on the Dead Sea. That's where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And there's a lot going on at Qumran that really sounds like John the Baptist. I'll show you some more pictures of that in a bit. Bethany beyond the Jordan is not the Bethany outside of Jerusalem. This one is in the southern part of the Jordan Valley, not too far from the Dead Sea. And we really don't know exactly where. The modern area is a military zone. It's right near the border with Jordan, and we can cross the Allenby Bridge there, but it's a complex thing, and it isn't fun. You can only go across in a specially ordered bus, and then there's security on both sides. There's been very, very little archaeology done in the region, but it has to have been in the southern Jordan Valley area. The Mount of Temptation from Luke 4 is in this general region. The tallest mountain in the area is called Kerental, Jebel Kerental, which means the Mount of the 40. And it's a tradition that Jesus went up on that mountain with Satan to be tempted. There is today, there are the ruins of a lot of structures up on that mountain. The oldest are a Byzantine era church from the 4th century, a monastery that was built into the cliffside. And there are bits and pieces of monastic architecture all over that mountain, simply because it's a traditional place. We really don't know. The Bible doesn't give us real clear information on the location of the Mount of Temptation, but it would be a good place. The Palestinian Authority, years ago when Yasser Arafat was in charge of the place, long before he died, pushed a plan to build a cable car from Jericho up to the top of the Mount of Temptation. And it's a very, very nice cable car with all the trimmings, places to sit down. You can take like 12 people in a car. It's really nice. There's one car going up while the other is coming down, and they just run back and forth. And the expenditure was many, many millions of dollars. The Europeans, countries, and the United States donated many, many, many millions of dollars to build this thing, much more than it actually cost. The corruption was amazing, just astounding. And today, nobody rides that cable car. There's a hotel at the bottom that nobody ever goes to, and the cable car still looks to me like it's in working condition, but you can't ride it, and nobody ever does. Very interesting. The the public ministry in Galilee is going to be a very interesting thing. This photograph was taken from the Mount of Beatitudes. And actually, I'm inside the chapel. I'm on the porch of the chapel, put up by a bunch of Italian nuns before World War II. Mussolini, the Italian dictator, actually paid for the construction of the convent and chapel here on the Mount of Beatitudes. But I think it was 1928. And it's a nice place. It's a very pretty place. But in this photograph, you're seeing most of the territory on which Jesus did his earthly ministry. So I'm standing on the Mount of Beatitudes. At the base of this hill is a place called Tagba, which is the seven springs, seven warm water springs come into the Sea of Galilee at that point, and it's a very, very good place to go fishing. So the calling of the apostles probably happened right here. We go just a little farther to the right, and there's the ancient Dell of Ginaret, which was a city set upon a hill that can't be hidden. That was right there. Just beyond that, the modern site of Nafginisar, which is a kibbutz. Beyond that, one of the promontories coming out into the lake is Magdala. Mary from Magdala is Mary the Magdalene. So all of these things are right here. The mountains in the background that form a pass. You can see a pass coming down to the lake. This is the mountain called Arbel, Arbel, and it's the major waypoint on the Great International Trunk Road, the road from Mesopotamia to Egypt, passes right by the Sea of Galilee at this point. Matter of fact, just to the right outside of this frame is the modern Israeli road heading north, which was built over the top of the Roman road, which in turn was built over the top of the ancient road. Jesus chose to do his public ministry in the world right on top of the international trade route. Literally, people from everywhere in the world would have come past here. Jesus could have done his ministry in Jerusalem if he had wanted to emphasize that he came for the Jews and he was the Jewish Messiah and he was going to be associated with the temple and the Talmud and the Pharisees. He would have gone to Jerusalem for his primary work. Instead, he went to a place that is far away from Jerusalem, even hated by Jerusalem, but where the nations would walk past. Jesus didn't come just for Israel, just for the Jews. He came to the world. And the very location of his ministry tells us that. Okay, at this point, I want to show you an artifact from this time frame. And I'm going to have to stop this share and start another one because Zoom doesn't let me do hyperlink. So we're going to stop this one. And I'm going to try to get another share screen up. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. Share. Oops, and I've got to kill this one, which is a real pain. And then we'll go to this one. And slideshow and presenter view. Ooh, bingo. Okay, this is another shot from the Sea of Galilee. The location is called Nafginisar. Nafginisar is a kibbutz planted about 150 years ago by Jews from Russia. They were amongst the first wave of settlers from the Jewish diaspora returning to Israel. The Bible predicts that the Israelis, the diaspora of Israel, would come back to the land. Nafginisar is one of the first places. Well, about 40 years ago, I believe it was 1986, something like that. No, 1982. Just looking at this. So about 40 years ago, engineers, for reasons that only engineers understand, had allowed the water level of the Sea of Galilee to drop by about 3 or 4 meters. So a significant drop. Sea of Galilee is not a deep lake, and quite a lot of seabed was opened up. And they only wanted to leave this opened up for as short a time as possible so that water level came down, and then it was going to start back up again. Some boys from the kibbutz at Nafginisar, the farming community at Nafginisar, were out playing in the mud flats, and they noticed some pieces of wood sticking up out of the mud, and they pulled at one, and it wouldn't come. So they ran back, and one of them told his father, who was one of the elders of the kibbutz, and several of the elders went out and they looked, and they realized this is a really old wooden structure, maybe a house, maybe we don't know what it was, but it's obviously very old. They called an archaeologist who immediately recognized that this was an emergency. And they put together an emergency salvage operation. One of the more remarkable operations ever put together in Israeli history. There were hundreds of volunteers working over a period of about a week to free this structure, which turned out to be a boat, from the mud, the Sea of Galilee. Now, of course, as soon as it's exposed to the atmosphere, this ancient wood will begin to deteriorate. It will lose its consistency. The water will run out of it, and it will begin to fall apart. So they were very, very, very careful to provide support and to keep it wet, and then to cover everything with polystyrene foam. It's a very complex process, but they did it very, very quickly, and then used a crane, actually 2 cranes, to lift this ancient boat out of the mud. Let me show you a model in the museum today. This is a model of the boat. It is looking toward the stern. That's the stern at the far end, the back of the boat. It has a kind of a pear shape. It's deeper and wider at the stern than at the bow. It has a single mast. It has 4, they look like oars sticking down into the water. Those operated like a keel. Toward the back, it has a rudder. And all of this is very, very reminiscent of mosaics that we have of boats on the Sea of Galilee from the time of Christ. In particular, the Romans won a great battle at a place called Magdala. Now, I showed you a picture with Magdala in it, about half a kilometer from Nafginisar, which in turn is about half a kilometer from the Mount of Beatitudes, and the place where Jesus called the apostles. Boats that look just like this one participated in the Battle of Magdala. The Romans hired a bunch, and the Zealots used a bunch. The Zealots, who were mostly fishermen around the Sea of Galilee region, fought against the Romans just before 70 AD, and quite a number of boats were sunk. Is it possible, the archaeologists asked themselves, that this was a fishing boat from the Sea of Galilee from the time of Christ that participated in the Battle of Magdala? It would be of tremendous historical importance. So they began pulling this out. They laid the original frame. Doesn't look like much, does it? This shapeless thing is the ribs and the planks of that original 12 or 13 meter long sailboat, a fishing boat made on the Sea of Galilee by fishermen for commercial fishing, and perhaps used during the Battle of Magdala. And whatever else we want to say about this, this is a fishing boat that may well have been used by fishermen in the correct corner of the Sea of Galilee at the time of Christ. So was this the very boat that Jesus was in? Well, we don't know. But the fact is, it might have been. And that all by itself is enough that the tourist people in Israel have begun to call this the Jesus boat. And I'm particularly fond of it because it is an artifact that directly touches the life of Christ. If this isn't the boat that the apostles rode around the Sea of Galilee, it is exactly like the kind of boat that they were in. Let me show you another picture. Same place. This tile-lined vat is where the boat was originally taken to be literally pickled. They filled it up with water, with electrolytes and kind of a silica substance floating in the water. The chemists in one of the big universities there in Israel debated for several days about what the best way to do this might be. And they finally came up with a method that would allow the water in the cells of the wood to be replaced with a kind of plastic. And it took a period of 8 or 10 years of soaking in this vat of chemistry in order to stabilize the boat. Fascinating thing. Here you see a close-up of the stern. And a lot of this doesn't look like anything. Some of it is still covered up with styrofoam, but you can see a lot of the ribs, you can see a lot of the planks. Today, it's set up in a museum. This is a close-up of the individual planks of one side of the boat. It's held up with this stainless steel frame that supports and protects every portion of the boat. This was quite literally a multi-million-dollar project, and it was all money that was raised by the kibbutz there on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. Now, what do we learn from this? Individual planks fitted together very carefully. They used mortise and tenon jointing, which today we know is not the most efficient way to put a boat together, but it was a method that could be done with the tools that were available at the time of Christ. It's made of a wide variety of different woods. It's not all one wood. It's not all made of oak or pine or cedar or anyone. It's made of wood that was available locally. The fishermen didn't need a pretty boat, and this one definitely isn't. The planks are made as smooth as could be, but they didn't care that it wasn't perfect. It had to float and hold them all up along with their catch so that they could bring fish in. They were commercial fishermen. They wanted to be able to go out, throw their nets, and pull in a load of fish. And this boat would serve the purpose. It was built by fishermen for fishermen, and there are no bells or whistles. Here's another view looking lengthwise from the stern toward the bow. The wider bow or the wider stern would have given buoyancy in a following sea. It was square rigged, so there would have been a big square sail. And that would have been excellent for sailing downwind. Sailing into the wind, the same mast could be turned into a lateen rig, a triangular sail, so that they could sail back upwind. But sailing downwind, a following sea would lift the stern, what's called the poop, to prevent the boat from being overrun by a following sea. Boats are built differently in different waters to reflect the problems that they've got. It's a wide, flat, seaworthy boat, definitely not designed for speed. It would have been a slow-moving, fairly clumsy boat. We look at it from the inside, the individual timbers and the individual planks on the outside are visible here. Again, let's look at the model with a model of the actual ruin in the background. You can see kind of the shape that this boat would have had. There's a place underneath, there's a little bit of decking inside. When Jesus went below to go to sleep, he would have snuggled down underneath some of that planking because it would be a slightly warmer place. Obviously, we call this the Jesus boat, but we don't know that it was. But it was very much like it. When Jesus told his disciples that he was going to make them fishers of men, what do you suppose they understood by that? The disciples had no notion at all of using an expensive fly rod and a bunch of expensive equipment and hip boots and whatnot to go up an expensive trout river in the mountains and maybe catch 2 or 3 fish and come home. These were commercial fishermen. They didn't go fishing as a holiday. They went fishing as a way of life. And the boat for them didn't have to be beautiful. It just had to do the job. It just had to do the job. I visualize the church as a commercial fishing operation. Our job is to get out there and effectively make disciples. It doesn't have to be pretty. We can meet in storefronts. We can meet in parks. We can meet in homes. We can meet in the basement. That part really doesn't matter. The important part is that we are the fishers of men. Jesus was not calling his disciples to some kind of a hobby. I'm going to make you fishermen. No, he was calling them to a lifestyle. He was calling them to a career. And they knew exactly what he was talking about. So go out and I'm going to make you into fishers of men. Let's end this one. I'm going to stop this share and go back to the other for just a moment. See if I can make that one go, and then we'll share. See here what I've got. What have I got? Okay, that was a Jesus boat. That was this one, and the share. All right, now this one. My goodness, sometimes this gets so difficult. There we go. Okay, so all of this happened in this spot. And when you're looking at this map, I'm not going to lay out everything that's going on this map, but the Galilean Ministry can very easily be plotted on a map. If you open up the Gospels and just look at where Jesus says or where the Gospels say Jesus went and what he did when he got there, it makes for a complex map. He was walking up and down and in and out and through all of these areas. The Jesus boat is found in the northwest corner, right at the foot of the Mount of Beatitudes, and within walking distance, actually, of Nazareth. All of this is happening in a very small area. People like to think that the Bible must take place in this huge place, but it's actually very small, with lots of details that are currently wide open, easily visualized. We see these things by just walking around the Sea of Galilee. And it's very easy to visualize the life of Christ in this area of the Galilee. When I take groups to Israel, which I haven't done in many years, but when I used to take groups to Israel, we would always spend time. Usually, if on a 10-day tour, we'd spend 3 days in Galilee, because that's the absolute minimum to get a look at this place. And everybody wants to go swim in the Sea of Galilee, which is fine. It's not a great swimming lake, but it is the Sea of Galilee. And when you look around at it, you can stand in any one place, particularly the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, and point out all of these are places where Jesus lived and worked and had his ministry and called his disciples and did this miracle or did that miracle. These places are all along the edge of the sea. And for the most part, we have excellent historical tradition, literary backup on all of the locations. The biblical locations are, in fact, mostly very well known. And again, that just backs up our knowledge of the Bible at that point. That's where I'm going to end today. We're going to come back on, let's see, there it is. We're going to come back on Wednesday and continue with the ministry of Christ. We'll go all the way up. I think we'll get as far as Jerusalem. Probably won't finish the life of Christ on Wednesday, but we're aiming in that direction. So this has been fun. I know there's a lot of detail here, but the whole point that I'm making, I'll come back and just underline this one more time. There are thousands of trivial details. A true proposition, like Jesus is the Son of God, who was born a man, lived a perfect life, died for our sins, and was raised from the dead for our justification. A proposition like that lives in a network of trivial detail. If Jesus really did all of these things, there will be connections in every direction, thousands of little connections to other things that we can prove to be true. People who say, oh no, this is just a myth, have to deal with the details. This is, on one level, this is what we call a circumstantial case for the gospel. Now, you and I know that the gospel is true because God revealed it. Non-Christians don't start there. Sometimes we can get through to them by just sharing the details. These things are true. This place is really here. This boat is really there. This mountain is exactly where we expect it to be. The Bible is accurate as far as we can directly test it. Doesn't it make sense that the propositions that the Bible gives us are also accurate? That's our argument. That's where we work. Anyway, let us unmute. Okay. So we'll see you again on Wednesday, and we'll pick up there with more of Jesus' ministry. I've forgotten what all is coming next. We'll stop at Qumran next. I've got to show you a bunch of pictures from Qumran, but then we'll eventually get to Jerusalem and the closing week of Jesus' life. In every case, lots and lots and lots of detail. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate seeing all of you. You guys are great fun. And I look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon. One never knows. But bye-bye. See y'all. Bye, Oscar. Bye, Don.
Ciao tutti, grazie tutti.
I got it. Okay. Roger, good to see you there. Hey.
Grazie, grazie.
I see Willie. Okay, good man. Outstanding. And Joyce and the Lees. Brother Joel, hi there. Good to see you, my friend. And Christy. Okay. And okay. All right. Yeah, a whole bunch of folks here today. Very good. We'll see you all on Wednesday. Love you all. And stay well.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao.
Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao a tutti.